Happy Recovery Month, sweet friends. For the month of September, I am partnering with Recover Alaska to bring you recovery stories, resources, and hope. The journey of recovery looks different for each one of us, so I will be sharing interviews that highlight a variety of ways that one person can recover. My wish is for these to bring you relief and hope as you learn that you are not alone and we can recover. This week's recovery session episode features Moira. Moira is an Alaska-based lawyer who is courageously sharing her story of recovery from alcohol. For additional recovery resources, head to blazebell.com/recovery. Now let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the recovery series. And I've got Moira here today to share her story of recovery. Thank you so much for being here.
So glad to be here. Thanks, Blaze.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so we were just talking about this, but the journey of recovery is different for everyone. And I really want these interviews to highlight different types of recovery journeys. And there's no right or wrong way to get sober, stay sober. And so I'm really grateful that you're going to share with us today. So I'd love to just start with, kind of your story. Where did you come from? If we think about our experience, our strength, and sharing our hope, where did it all start? At what point did things start to become unmanageable, and how did you see that?
Sure. So I guess I'm sort of a story of a pretty high functioning alcoholic who I went to law school and I did pretty well in law school. And then I moved home to Alaska and I clerked for a year. And then I started working in a private law firm. And working in the private law firm was really stressful. It was 2008, 2009. And so there was an economic crash going on, although of course now we know that it was nothing compared to what we're experiencing now. But I was really worried about just my own perfectionism. I wanted to do a great job and I was worried I was going to lose my job. And then in 2010, and by the way, that wasn't rational, right? Like I can look back now and see the errors in my thinking. Because there was no reason to think that I wasn't going to keep my job, and Alaska didn't get affected by that economic crisis, but that was kind of the errors in my thinking. And then in 2010, and so my drinking during that time was really recreational and it was really fun. The law firm would have Friday night wine get-togethers at 5:00, and it was just delightful because one of the partners was a real wine connoisseur. And so we would have great bottles of wine, and then I would hop in the car and drive home. And, it would be three, 4 glasses in, which was enough for me to feel affected. So it was not good decision making on my part. And then 2010 rolled around and I had 3 personal crises come right hot on the heels of one another. I had 2 miscarriages and I lost my grandma, who was a real stalwart hero in my life. And as we went into that winter, as is true of so many Alaskans, I really started to lean more and more on drinking as a coping skill for my stress, for my anxiety, for my depression, for my grief. And my second miscarriage was over Thanksgiving. And as we rolled into December, drinking became more than just something that I wanted to do. It was something I needed to do. And so and I would describe my drinking, I'll get to the gory part real fast, but I would just say real fast that some people have to drink every single day and have that kind of an addictive relationship. Mine was more of an abusive relationship where I could skip a couple days, but then once I did it, I drank too much and I would get pretty drunk. And so finally, kind of what ended up looking like bottom for me was going to a work Christmas party and blacking out and not remembering what had happened. And the next day people were like, "Oh, Moira, you said this and you said that." No. And I just felt such shame associated with that. And so it took me another 2 weeks or so, but then I went and saw a counselor for the first time and just about everything. And I talked to her about my drinking, and I said, I think I have a problem with my drinking. And she asked me about it. And that was the last day I took a drink. That was December 30th. I went home that night and I had a glass of wine, knowing that it was going to be my last. And I quit. And I did it without any, not to jump to the next question, but I did it without any AA or really any support. And I even did it telling myself it wasn't going to be forever. Because I couldn't kind of countenance the idea of never drinking again. That seems so ridiculous. But I just stopped kind of cold turkey. But then several months later, got into AA through my husband. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I didn't know any of this about you. I mean, we're
Yeah.
acquaintances that have crossed paths in different ways. So thank you for sharing this. It's really interesting. And I think your story is so important to share because I feel like it's so easy to go, well, what I'm going through isn't as bad as XYZ. And that is such a huge, snowball effect because there's all kinds of terrible things going on. What it really comes down to is, how is this affecting me internally? How's it affecting me externally? How's it affecting the people around me? And what's going to happen next,
Right.
So for you to have that kind of embarrassing experience with work, and then I'm sure you, with the shame, could kind of play that tape forward and go, oh God, like what's going to happen next, or what's going to happen around my family, or, whatever it is. And so I think it's important for people to understand that it doesn't have to be rock bottom, like getting arrested or hurting someone. It's really that self check-in. And anytime somebody says to me, like, I think I have a problem, but I'm not sure, you can kind of guarantee if you're asking yourself that, something's off. And
Right.
that might not mean you need to be sober for the rest of your life, but most people that don't have a problem never ask themselves that.
Right. Yeah.
Even like real party animals I know, they're not questioning it because they're like,
No.
no, this was on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. What's the issue? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and another side note, so I spent a lot of my 20s working as an executive assistant in different law firms. And so I'm very familiar with the kind of culture and the lawyers, and depending on what kind of law, being very high strung, and there's a lot of pressure and the deadlines, and it can get pretty nutty. And there was a lot of like lawyers tying one on at Christmas parties and things. And so
Yeah.
I kind of witnessed that work hard, play hard thing. But yeah, so that's pretty interesting.
It's a profession that lends itself to it. But it's a profession where alcoholism and other addictions can hide because people tend to be pretty high functioning. And so they convince themselves that they're fine, and then it turns out they're just not, and whether that's fine, fine is a continuum, right? And we all identify where our comfort levels are. But there's a lot of lawyers who suffer a lot, I think, because of an addiction or an abuse of a drug or an alcohol. And it doesn't have to be that way. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's move into that. It doesn't have to be that way. Because a lot of people don't know that. And what you said about, I didn't think this was going to be forever. And maybe you still don't think that, or maybe you're like, wow, I've gone however many years and life still goes on and some things are even more fun. I did the same thing where I'm like, when I finally was going to try for real, I made a commitment of 1 year. I'm like, if my life is not better in 1 year, I'm going right back to what I was doing. Because at that point, I couldn't imagine going a month,
Right.
So yeah, so let us know, like, so we know what kind of put you on that different path, and really great that counseling was helpful to you, and then eventually getting into a 12-step program. So, what has helped you stay sober? What's helped you move through? I think a lot of us, once that coping skill goes away, a lot of old things come up and we have to figure out a new way to deal with that. So, how has the journey been for you?
I would say it's been varied, um, and just feeling the sense of responsibility and wanting to be the best mom that I can for my kids. I think that when things have gone badly or been rough for me, it's been because I've been 13th stepping, not 13th stepping. What is it called when you are diagnosing other people?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, 12 stepping them. Like I'm trying to, project onto other people what their problems are. Or I would say during this pandemic, this has actually been the hardest time for me in terms
Mm.
of my sobriety. We choose in our household, some don't, to have like cooking wine or cooking beer every once in a while we have around. We don't drink it, but we had some cooking wine this spring, and I am telling you, I just opened it up, took a sniff, and was like, whoa. And what I thought about in that moment that helped me not pick up was I have a timer app on my phone that counts the number of years and hours and minutes and months since I got sober. And just mentally thinking about that going back to zero was enough to be like, fine, okay, I guess I won't pick up right now. And of course, after that, I started going back to meetings to try to get myself back on track, remind myself that I am not somebody who can pick up again.
Yeah. Oh, how interesting. So, and how long have you been sober?
9 years.
Okay. So, what did it feel like to all of a sudden have this urge? I mean, do you have cravings regularly, or was this really kind of out of the blue?
It felt out of the blue. I mean, I was told in recovery by somebody that alcohol is a little bit like a magnet, that the further you get away from it, the less the cravings are. And I think that's true for me. So it did feel out of the blue, and it was really scary, I guess. On some level, it was probably exhilarating because it was like, ooh, I could do that, and it's like there's no law saying I can't do that. There's no prohibition on me doing it. um, but I just couldn't feel good in my conscience doing it, and so I was able to walk away from it. But I know for me, I'm lucky because not everybody has that ability, and I think some people have more of a physical compulsion and a physical addiction than I do, and so I know that I'm lucky in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you put the cooking wine down.
And I poured it out too. I was like, you're
Good.
done. Yeah.
Good. And I think once in a while, those moments can be helpful because, like you said, it was like a little mini wake up call and you went back to your support system.
Yeah.
So, you said when you first started, you didn't have really a support team. So, at this point, I would love for you to start sharing, I guess, just any like tips you have for people listening right now who are struggling, people who are like you, 9 years ago, 10 years ago. What tips do you have? What's been the most helpful?
So I would say regularly check in on your mental health. Um, and if you're somebody who's never experienced joy on a regular basis, then you need to understand that you may have depression, you may have anxiety, you may have a mental illness that requires treatment, and do not be afraid of getting help for that. I think the stigma associated with mental illness has gone away somewhat, but it's still not gone. And people still think they're supposed to buck up and handle things, or they think that that's what normal looks like. And so I think checking in with your mental health regularly is so important, because to the extent that alcohol or drugs are a coping mechanism, you can avoid that altogether if you're doing proper maintenance of your mental health. Um, the second thing, in the months after I quit drinking and before I got into AA, I was on my own, and I was still with the people's places and things that I had been with. And so I would go to my law firm Friday nights, and they would say, "Why aren't you drinking?" And they clearly viewed it as an indictment of themselves. And so rather than being able to respect where I was coming from, they viewed it as like, if Moira thinks she has a problem, then I must really have a problem. And it took incredible strength in those months to just listen to my own voice and just say, no, I know you're my superior. I know you're somebody I admire. And I know you're somebody who has decades more of road underneath you than I have, but still, I know what's best for me. And so I guess my second piece of advice is really to listen to yourself. And then my third piece of advice is really reach out to the support networks. I think people people believe that they're not going to find themselves in the rooms in AA, that somehow it's going to be other people, people who are believers or people who are, you know, people from the streets, you know, I mean, there's all of these assumptions. And I think the biggest value for me of going to AA was just to see from a truly humble, grounded place how much I was like other people who are in recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, I really echo that. And 12-step meetings haven't been a big part of my recovery the past few years, but they really were in the beginning. And one of my favorite things is to go to meetings when I'm traveling. And I think it's really fun, especially when you say you're from Alaska. Everyone thinks you're cool. Um, but I remember being in a meeting. I was in North Dakota. Everyone in there was like old old women who spent their days in their garden, and they were talking about gardening and mint juleps and these things, and I like 100% couldn't relate to that, but I still knew I have the same brain as that lady, you know? And so there was a lot of comfort, because I don't know how you felt, but for me, I felt so alone throughout my addiction. I thought, what is wrong with me? Why are all these people around me doing this and they're fine? And I am just out of control and working so hard to hide that. And then going into a room full of people that there's nothing you can say that surprises them, you know? And it's just, they're like, yeah, we all have the same brain. So anyway, we're going to do this now, you know? And it's like, oh, wow, you know, it's really comforting. It was such a relief.
And there's so much beauty in that, right? Because it's about our common humanity. And, you know, that is what life is all about in my mind, is finding those moments of common humanity, because we share it, right? We all have the same, you know, or similar fears and concerns and, you know, think that other people think we're this or that. And it's just like, I think AA and the other sort of recovery places really humble you and allow you to just be okay with being yourself and understand that other people are just going through exactly the same thing you are.
Right. And I think also going into those rooms, if that's something you want to do or try, to go in with a really open mind. Because, like
Yeah.
you were saying, we can do this with anything, but you're either looking for the differences, which you'll find, or you're looking for the similarities, which are there. You
Yep.
know, so just having that, okay, I don't have to agree with 100% of everything going on in this room, but this might still be where I need to be right now.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Can I extract some value?
Yeah. And counseling. So is that still a part of your journey? Is still a part of what? Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So counseling and antidepressants and stuff like that are both a part.
Mm-hmm.
It's just who I am. I have a severe enough mental health challenge that I can't do it on my own. And
Mm.
so that's challenging for me because, you know, it's sort of every day I take the pills and I'm like, I don't want to have to take this. I want to be better than this, right? But that's just not who I am. And I know that if I don't cope with it in a way that is through counseling and through medication, then I will cope with it through alcohol. I mean, when I had the temptation earlier this spring, I was very much aware of the fact that it was just the stress of this situation was really getting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I needed to not only go back to AA, but also again do that step number one, that check in with my own mental health and wellness. So
Yeah.
I try to. I mean, it's really easy to say these things. Actually doing them is a little bit more challenging, but I do the best I can.
Yeah. Well, and that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And I mean, with that in mind, you're sitting here with 9 years of sobriety. So
Yeah.
that means that every time a stressors come up, you found a way to work through it in another way. And I know
Yeah.
just from your social media and things that you have a really active life that's really full of friends and family and love and fun and adventure. So, you know, it's
Yeah.
not like you're just sitting at home. Well, we're all sitting at home a lot lately, but you know, you're not in pain. You're not white knuckling
In
it.
pain. No. And the biggest thing that's been helpful for me in AA is we seek progress, not perfection, right? If I were to allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good, which I did for a number of years, I will pick up because you constantly are failing, and failure for me is stressful. And so for me, not picking up has to do with accepting that perfection is not going to happen, and it's not worth holding on to as a goal, because it just costs too much to hold that goal out there.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, perfectionism is, I think so. I heard someone say something like it's just a fancy form of fear, or, fear
Right.
dressed up or something. Yeah. So I'm glad that you feel that way and just are leaning into the acceptance.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I really, really just honor your story, and I'm so grateful that you're willing to be vulnerable and understanding how much strength that holds. And even just by sharing, the few sentences about antidepressants, I mean, that's really common and people really struggle with that stigma. And you are a thriving, amazing, intelligent woman, and it's going to help people to know that it's okay. It's okay. They're not alone in that. And for some people, that's making your life so much better. And so, again, back to the acceptance. So thank you, Moira, so much for sharing your story with us today. I'm really, really
You're
grateful.
welcome. Thanks for inviting me. It was great to be here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. The recovery sessions are brought to you by Recover Alaska, whose vision is for Alaskans to live free from the consequences of alcohol misuse so that they are empowered to achieve their full potential. Learn more at recoveralaska.org. If you'd like to support this podcast, please subscribe, share, and leave a 5-star review so we can get more healing messages out into the world. I love you all so much, and I'll catch you next time.